Hi, this is the Catholic Lady, and we are currently reading The Great Lion of God by Taylor Caldwell. We'll continue with chapter 39. The fourth slow year turned at Tarsus, and Saul waited, and no sound came to him, no fresh revelation. He was like a ship thrown upon a beach, and there left to dry, wither beneath the sun, useless and without a crew or a captain, its sails flapping in the wind, and no movement on its parched deck. Had it all been a dream, a delusion? Had God forgotten at last and left him to die here in this far spot? The spiritual leader of the Jews asked him, with hesitant compassion, not to speak in the synagogue any longer, for it angered the people who remembered that he had once persecuted his own. Nor was he welcome among the Nazarenes, who also remembered. I am friendless, he thought, save for those in the house of Reb Isaac, and the woman I dare not take, and my old tutor, Aristo, and his wife. He walked in his gardens. He labored with the servants. He picked grapes for wine. He had a small shop in Tarsus where he sold the goat's hair he wove for tents, and he had few customers. I am like Cain, with a brand on my forehead, he would think. There was not the furious hostility toward him that he encountered in Jerusalem, but it was deep enough to make him a pariah to his own people. He wrote letters to his cousin, Titus Milo, in Rome, and was grieved to hear of old Aulus's death, and the death of his cousin Hannah. Yet everything became as a dream to him at last, and he waited for the awakening so long delayed. His sister wrote him with news of the dwindled family, and she tried to make her letters gay and comforting, as if she suspected his misery. He wished to speak of his dryness of soul and the grayness of his spirit, but could not. Only one truly knew, and that was Elisheba, and more he went to the house where she lived for the consoling sight of her, and her soft smile, and the sound of her step. Then he could go no more, for her brothers were becoming sullen and casting reproachful glances at him and lifting their eyebrows, and so even this oasis in the desert was closed to him. Sometimes he cried at night, God has forgotten me, and so should I not forget him also, and take my joy to my heart, and live as other men, and beget children, and sit under my own fig tree, and rejoice in the sight of my wife? He would then leave his house, and go to the house of Elisheba, and stand without the gates like a thief, crushed with desire and loneliness and love. But Elisheba, keeping a pact with him and God, did not come to him, though he knew, with a strange knowing, that she was aware of his presence. Then he would return to his house, vaguely comforted, as if her hand had touched his in the darkness, and her heart had lain on his own. As he had done years before, he argued, implored, wrangled with God. I am like a steed, saddled and bridled, stamping his feet, and you do not call me to the battle. I'm like a sword rusting in the scabbard. I'm a banner unraveling in the wind, and the insignia upon it is fading. My helmet has dimmed, my armor is pitted. I'm no longer young. Use my strength, O my Lord and my Savior. Use my years, or I will wither like the dried meat of a nut. Where is the altar to which you would call me? Why have you thrown me aside like the rind of a melon, like chaff, like useless straw? Here are my hands, my heart, my blood, my flesh. Take me before I die in an old age, mumbling for a forgotten dream. There was no answer. Distracted, he would pace the empty rooms of his house. Mourning as if they were freshly dead, he visited his parents' tombs. There he would speak to his Father, imploring his intercession with the silent God. "You loved him, my Father," he would murmur at the stone of the tomb, "and surely you served him, and he will hear you, though he is now deaf to my cries. How have I offended him, that he keep his countenance from me? Touch his garment, the shining garment of the Messiah, and remind him I await his call, as once he told me." One day in his hapless wanderings in the cool of the early evening, he found himself passing a small cemetery where the Gentiles were buried, but Gentiles of a humbler station, such as freedmen and servants. The wall was low, and he saw the graves in the dark cypresses. Then suddenly he was shaken, for on several of the graves he saw rude wooden crosses, twined with flowers or ribbons, and he opened the gate and went within, treading gently as if not to disturb the sleepers in the dust. The graveled path led around a cluster of cypresses, and he came upon more graves with crosses upon them. And now he started and almost fell back, for a young man was kneeling with clasped hands before one of those crosses, and his hair, red, blazed like fire in the sun, and his face was the face of the younger Saul. "My son," thought Saul. He would have crept away, but his slight movement caught the attention of the young man, who lifted quiet blue eyes, as metallic as Saul's own, to his face. Boreas rose to his feet, still gazing at Saul. The two confronted each other in silence. The sun glinted on the cypresses and the withering grass of the summer. The wind talked to the trees, and a distant chariot clattered on the hot road. "I know you," said Boreas, and his voice was the voice of Saul. "Yes," said Saul. He tried to smile. He felt his heart cracking with the old pain. "I saw you as a child. You are Boreas. You are you not, the son of—" Boreas did not answer. He stood as stalwart as a young lion and did not move. A peculiar smile came up to rest upon his mouth. A butterfly hovered near his shoulder. He surveyed Saul with penetration, and the odd smile increased. "I never forgot you," said Boreas at last. "As the years passed, I remembered you more and more, and I have seen you in the marketplace, Saul ben Hillel, and I have heard you speak and harangue the people. I have followed you into the synagogues, for all it is unlawful." And the smile deepened with satire and irony. "And I have marveled at your eloquence." Saul could not speak. He wanted to flee, but Boreas's look held him. "I am a Nazarene also," said the young man, "and so was the good man I called my father, who lies in this grave." He gestured at the larger cross. "I say he was good, for always must he have known I was not his son. Yet he loved me, and took me as his own. Was it because of the money? But the money did not come to him for several years after I was born. And I remember that he dangled me on his knee as a babe, and taught me to walk, long before there was money." The ironic smile became colder and harder. "The money of my grandfather, Hillel ben Baruch." Saul's face had paled to the color of clay, and his mouth opened as if he could not breathe. Yet he could not glance aside from that condemning and satirical young countenance, and the youth suddenly appeared amused. "You thought I did not know how you would creep upon me when I was a child, after we had first met," said Boreas. "I pretended not to see you, and your peering through the hedges or peeping over walls. I was so dear to you, Saul ben Hillel, that you dared not speak to me, your son?" "Look at me," said Boreas, and he advanced a pace. "Do you deny that I am your son? Do you know what they say to me, those who have seen you and know me? They laugh, as if at a good-tempered jest. And they say, 'There is but one in all Tarsus besides yourself, Boreas, who has the color of your hair and your eyes and your features. And that is Saul ben Hillel of the noble Jewish house. Perhaps when your mother was carrying you in her belly, she happened upon him and impressed himself upon her mind, and so marked you. That is what they say, Saul ben Hillel, and they have said that since my earliest youth, and sometimes in the hearing of the good man who had taken me into his family." His voice had risen, and it lashed at Saul like a whip. Saul spread out his hands and said, "Condemn me if you will, Boreas. But I loved your mother, and I was hardly 15 when I begot you, years younger than yourself at your present age. And she was but a miserable slave, and you were a Jew of a great house." Saul shook his head. No, no. He could not tell this young man that his mother had known other men besides himself, and was not an innocent virgin when she had given herself to him, and that she was his first encounter with a woman. Boreas's eyes narrowed, and his red lashes were like a flame across his fair and freckled face. "I never knew my mother," said Boreas, "but I have heard she was very beautiful and kind and loving, and she was the favorite of her mistress, who freed her when she was married and gave her a dowry. Were the stories lies?" "No, they were not lies," said Saul. He gathered strength. "I have told you, I was not yet 15. I am a Jew. Your mother was not a Jewish maiden. I could not have married her, for my father would not have given his consent, and I had duties to my people." Boreas said, "I have heard of those duties, for your fame preceded you, your return, my father." Saul could not endure the words, nor the smile which accompanied them. "I am not a child," said the young man. "I have lain with slave girls, and as you lay with one of them. Why then do I condemn you? I do not know. Perhaps I have dreamed you would claim me, but that was a false dream, was it not? I am not a Jew." Saul held out his arms in a vehement gesture, and he dropped his hands fiercely on Boreas's strong young shoulders, and he cried, "You are my son, my seed, and I did not claim you, fearing what was already come to pass, and desiring only your peace." Boreas started to recoil from him, and raised his hands to seize those of Saul, to fling them from his shoulders. But as he touched his father's hands, his own came to rest on them, helplessly, and they stood and gazed into each other's eyes, and slowly they began to smile at each other. Then Saul took his son into his arms and embraced him hungrily and said, "I have not forgotten you, Boreas, my son, as you know. I have longed for you through the years, but I would not have you harmed nor derided. For your sake I did not seek you out. Condemn me for a coward, if you will. But I was a coward on your behalf. And oh, that my father had held you on his knee and had kissed your cheek." "I visit his tomb and the tomb of my grandmother," said Boreas, and his voice became husky. "I am proud that I am of their flesh, and of yours also. Now I understand, and I implore you to forgive me." Saul drew him closer and kissed his forehead and then his cheeks. "You have come to me as the sun brightening my life," he said, his voice shaking. "I have none but you of my seed. All that I have shall be yours, for I am a man without a home, without a land now, and without a people, and perhaps even without a God." It seemed to him, when he left Boreas in the cemetery, that his flesh had been torn, and that he had left a vital member of it behind him. But he was also comforted. He had arranged with Boreas that they meet in quiet places, where they could speak together, and where Saul would teach him the ancient truths of his people. "I am not alone," Saul often exulted to himself, and he went to his lawyers to consult with them secretly.